I'm Terry Colath. I'm here today to start the fall semester with Professor Adrian Kerr. We're beginning with 5 sessions on the history of England. Thank you for joining me, Adrian.
It's a pleasure, Terry. It's great to be here at Shell Point.
Now, the history of England. Last semester, you took us through the history of the United States to 1815. Now I've asked if you would do the history of England. And I think the most interesting thing about you doing this, or a lot of interesting things, is that you have dual citizenship.
Indeed.
And you have experience in both countries, lots of experience.
Indeed.
And you're an historian.
Thank you. Yes. England is one of these countries that was a little bit slow in getting going because it was in the northern part of Europe, and so civilization was well established in the rest of the world, in the Mediterranean, before the glaciers went away and life could start properly. So a bit of a slow start, but we'll talk about the first people who came across on the continent and what they brought with them, Stonehenge life. Then, of course, the most famous example of their activity is Stonehenge, which we will talk about and what that means. It's interesting to observe that Stonehenge was built by the ancient Britons around the same time as the pyramids, within 100 years.
That's fascinating.
It is.
You think so? There was just something going on that made people want to build and leave legacies?
Well, it's kind of odd because, yes, there's commonality in this, that people want to build something that has a religious significance. Mm-hmm. That's clear. But in the case of Egypt, it was pyramids. But remember, the Egyptians were a very sophisticated country by the time they were building their pyramids. They were traveling all around the Middle East, they were gold mining, they had a centralized government, they had tax. So they were well down the road. They've been a single country for about 1,000, 1,500 years. Stonehenge was many, many, many years after that before they had a centralized government. So Stonehenge is a bit of a fluke in the sense that it represents an artifact that we can see today, but it didn't bring with it all of the centralization that we see in Iraq, for instance, Mesopotamia, or China, or in Egypt. So England was a slow starter.
Interesting. And through this 5-session series, you're going to show us how they zipped right ahead.
Yes, well, they picked up. The weather got better, population increased, farming got more intense, and then we started to see people showing interest in the resources of England. And the Greeks, for instance, used to trade all the way from the eastern Mediterranean up to Cornwall for one particular purpose: tin. To make bronze, you need tin, and so they would trade their manufactured goods up to Cornwall, and they would buy tin. This is something like 500 BC. They were trading tin, and in fact, so much so that the Greeks and then subsequently the Romans decided that it should be called the Tin Isles. So England, Great Britain was called the Tin Isles by those ancient civilizations. At that time, the Celts were the dominant culture, all the way from Switzerland to Spain to England. And they had the same language, and the Celtic fringe left today in Wales and in Scotland and Ireland, they have a common language, Gaelic or Celtic. They had brothers in the mainland. They traded with them, they were related to them, the tribes, and the Belgae tribes. One of them was in Belgium, hence the name Belgium, and the other one was in southeast England, and they were just different offshoots of the same tribal group, the Belgae. And when Julius Caesar invaded Gaul to become famous and then take over the Roman Empire, he uses Gaul as a stepping stone. The Belgae were a difficult, intransigent, aggressive tribe in Belgium, and he had to pacify them, and he got irritated because their brothers and cousins from England would come over and lend a hand to fight the Romans. So when Julius Caesar finally pacified Belgium, he then went across the Channel just to punish the English, so to speak, and don't come back over the Channel and cause me problems again. He never went with a view to conquer England. There wasn't enough resources and he had enough on his plate. But he did come across, and he made it clear that Rome would not take it kindly if the Britons got involved in the Roman Empire and the continent. Now, the Romans changed their mind because of tin, and also the British people, when they were captured, were made good soldiers and fighters. So for a number of reasons later, after Julius Caesar had died, Claudius, the emperor, decided that he would invade England and make it a colony, which is what he did. And so England came under Roman rule. But of course, there were many tribal leaders who didn't like the idea of having to pay taxes and being run by Roman governors. And one of those most famous ladies in history, her husband was killed by the Romans, and her daughters were attacked by the Roman governor, and in revenge she swore that she's going to kick the Romans out of England, and she almost did. And that's the story of Queen Boadicea.
Boadicea. And that brings us to the end of session 1. I hope you'll join Professor Kerr for session 1 so that you are ready to go through the entire series of the history of England.